Joining me is General Jack Keane, who was Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army, four-star general, who's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, thanks once again for joining us. I have to say, I've been really disappointed and disturbed by what I'm hearing from Donald Trump. Normally, I'm a big supporter of his foreign policies, but can you explain to me why he is now smearing the Ukrainian president as a dictator, the man who started this war, and a former comedian now ruining his country?
Yeah, well, certainly these statements that President Trump made are really unfortunate, to say the least. And I think at the heart of this is a couple of frustrations. Number one, President Zelenskyy was presented a deal by the Treasury Secretary of the United States a few days ago. And given the realities of that deal, President Zelenskyy was not able to sign it. It doesn't mean that he wouldn't sign it eventually, but the deal had to do with the minerals and the United States investment in those minerals, some 26 trillion minerals inside Ukraine that have been documented by a Canadian geological survey company. And President Trump seized those minerals as a way of returning to the American taxpayer the money that has already been allotted in support of Ukraine over the 3 years in the war. And I think he got very frustrated that President Zelenskyy rejected it. The second thing that's been a source of frustration is I believe President Zelenskyy overreacted to not being invited to the meeting in Saudi Arabia between the Russian negotiating team and the United States negotiating team. I know for a fact that when President Trump called Putin last Wednesday, he didn't know for sure, that is, President Trump didn't know whether Putin was serious about going into negotiations. And out of that conversation, he concluded it was obvious that Putin was willing to meet and give it a try. At the same time, he didn't know for sure if this was part of Putin's bluffing, manipulating, or was he sincere? So the meeting that took place in Saudi Arabia was largely to feel out the Russian negotiating team if they had the power to act on Putin's behalf and move towards some kind of a compromise. And it was not appropriate at that time for Zelenskyy or his team to be at that negotiations, in my view. And that was the view of the Americans who were dealing with it. Andrew, as unfortunate as the statements have been, I do believe this is resolvable. And the reality is, why do I think that? Because President Trump and President Zelenskyy want the same thing.
Well, I'm hoping that your take is correct, that this is what we've seen for years now, Trump's negotiating style. I'd like to see him be as tough on Putin as he was on Zelenskyy, and it's been very damaging for Zelenskyy. But you have talked to General Kellogg, so I think that you have a better steer on where this is all going. You also gave testimony last week, and this feeds into this, General. You gave testimony last week to the House Armed Services Committee on preparing for this global threat environment. And I think this feeds into it in this way because you were talking about America facing real challenges now and not being prepared for them, the military threat, and particularly now China, because it is taking heart out of any sign that America's going weak on defending something like Ukraine. Tell us your main points in your address.
Yeah, my concern is that the threats that we're facing from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, together, collectively, all working together, this axis of nations that oppose the United States and like-minded democracies, we haven't seen anything quite like that since World War II. And the reality is the last time we were prepared for conflict in multiple theaters was during the Cold War, and we weren't prepared. But when the Congressional Commission I was on, we issued a bipartisan unanimous report. We believe we're not prepared today to fight a war in multiple theaters. In other words, if war broke out in the Indo-Pacific region, we would be challenged there to win, and indeed could lose, because China outguns us and outmans us on every major platform except submarines. We have to rebuild the United States military to establish effective deterrence, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region.
General, I don't know whether you're aware of that, but we're getting a little warning right now from China. We've had 3 naval ships come, I think, within 150 kilometres or so of Sydney, having a little sniff around. I don't think they've ever been in that part of the world for a long time. I mean, should we be alarmed by them testing us like this?
Yes, I mean, China has become considerably more aggressive in the Indo-Pacific region, and particularly when it comes to Taiwan. Back in 2018 and 2019, there was several violations of the air defense identification zone in the airspace around Taiwan. A few years ago, there were several hundred. Last year, in 2023, over a year ago, there was 1,700 in 1 year. In 2024, there were over 3,000. So China has completely stepped up their aggression, not just of Taiwan, but of Japan, of the Philippines, of Vietnam, and now, as you pointed out, incidents involving Australia itself. President Xi is preparing for war, and he's sending a signal that he's also ready to act when he makes that decision. What we have to do is deter that from happening, put it in President Xi's mind what we did with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. We could impose cost on them and put in doubt whether their campaign could be successful or not. That is called deterrence. It was credible. They could see it because we exercised it right in front of them every 2 years. Tens of thousands of troops and air power involved in those exercises. They saw what we had in mind. They knew we were committed to fight them if necessary. That's credible deterrence. The capability is there, and the will to use it is there.
Well, America's going to have to lift its defence spending from 3.5% of GDP, which is a pretty big low compared to when you were talking about America did have that capacity. And we have to do the same. So a lot of work to do. General Keane, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew, and your audience as always.